Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 144 today. And I am here with my guest, Kevork Almassian. He hosts the wonderful show called Syriana Analysis. How are you doing today, Kevork? And mate, your beard's looking very good, and so is your hairstyle.
Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you very much for having me, first of all, and thank you for your work, for enlightening the people of what's happening around the world. It's important for more people to join the community of this online community of presenting different opinions and perspectives so that the people can see both sides or multiple sides of the story, and so that they can make up their mind. What's happening around the world is very important because it impacts us, and as the quote goes, even if you're not interested in politics, politics is interested in you. So we have to be all, in my opinion, active and not passive.
It's like a bee that will keep haunting you no matter what you're trying to get away with it.
Mm.
So, Kevork, before we get on to politics, what have you been up to today? Anything much, and what have you been up to today? And done anything interesting? And what have you been doing?
Actually, I'm a nerd. I've become recently a nerd, waking up in the morning and fasting till 12 o'clock, and just drinking coffee before my breakfast, and preparing for my live stream every single day. It has become like not only a job, but also duty, especially with the current events in Palestine, that it motivates me and also impacts me immensely emotionally. But I don't want to show emotions to the people, because I'm not here to, let's say, manipulate people's thinking and what they should think of Palestine. So I try to present my subjective opinion, of course, but detached from the emotions that I have deep inside, because I am attached to the Palestinian case since I was a kid. I grew up on this struggle of the Palestinians for liberation. So I would love to see the Palestinians liberated, and I would love to see a Palestinian nationhood and a state and equal rights for all the citizens and all the people there. So this is, I believe, like, I wake up and I do this every day, and then I go to the gym just to rebalance myself, and then come back, sleep, and repeat every day. So this is the life of Kevork.
I can tell you're very professional, mate. You've got the beard going. You've got the man bun going. It looks like you've really got. It's very interesting. So, mate, Kevork, tell me about yourself. Like, how did you get into journalism yourself? Like, what? So, how did you get yourself into journalism?
That's
And
a
when did you start Syria analysis?
Mhm.
So tell me
Actually,
about
that's a very interesting topic, because I never intended to become a journalist. It wasn't in my plan to become a journalist or a political commentator or to create a podcast. My initial plan was, when I studied international relations and diplomacy, and then I did a master in political science and also studied European affairs in Paris. My idea was to either become an academic in this field so that I continue my PhD, or to get involved in diplomacy, to become a diplomat representing my country in the international forums, organizations such as the UN, or become an ambassador at a later stage representing my country. But because of the war situation in Syria, I realized that there is a need for someone who excels English. He can, or let's say, he can present the point of view of millions of Syrians inside Syria to the outside world. And because of the this vacuum due to the mainstream media suppression of opinions, and they don't show the other side of the story. So I thought that I have to do something more, and that is presenting the opinions of people to the outside world. So I thought of first creating a Facebook group, was called Syria Now, News and Analysis. And I managed that group for like 3-4 years. And my Facebook personal account also grew immensely, and I started posting in English most of the time, but then I joined Twitter. However, I thought that the visual content, like creating a video, commenting, hosting guests, is more attractive to the people to join and watch and listen and learn. So I started my Syriana Analysis YouTube channel in 2017, early 2017, when ISIS was still in its peak power, to show the people on whose side the United States is, who are they supporting in Syria, and why these terrorist groups are growing and expanding in the country, despite the allegations from the American side that they are in Syria to fight terrorism, and there is a US-led campaign against ISIS, etc. But despite that, ISIS is expanding. So I touched the root cause of the war in Syria and why they wanted to remove Assad from power, and why the CIA and the Zionist lobby, they jumped the wagon and they wanted to destabilize the country, and why many regional countries and international powers supported these terrorist groups in Syria. So by doing so, of course, I've become vilified by many major, let's say, mainstream media outlets, these big talking heads who call themselves pundits on Syria. And it's funny, that someone who never visited Syria, for example, sitting in DC, or someone like Charles Lister, who was in Syria for a few days, sitting on a camel, thinking that he thinks he knows Syria better than a Syrian who was born and raised there and studied there and knows the society and knows what's happening there on the ground. I'm not saying they don't know what's happening, but they claim to know what is the correct thing for the Syrians. What should the Syrians adopt, and what should they accept and not accept? So I challenge their narratives. So that's how I became more, let's say, known in the community of the people who want to know what's happening in Syria, especially with the mistrust to the legacy media. There are increasing number of people that they distrust the media, and they want to listen to the alternative opinions and people who come from Syria, like myself. So that was the beginning in 2017. And nowadays, thankfully, my YouTube channel is still growing, and I expanded the work. I started speaking about also what's happening in Ukraine, based on my knowledge of what happened in Syria, also in Palestine, Nagorno-Karabakh, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, etc., etc. So my channel is more comprehensive about the geopolitical cases. I don't claim to be knowledgeable about everything and anything. However, if something happens in a certain geography in the world, I take my time. I don't speak about it the second day. I take my time. I educate myself. I learn the geography, because I'm someone who believes in geopolitics, and I believe that most of the wars are because of geopolitical reasons and financial reasons. So I check why this country is important and why the conflicting sides, for example, are struggling over this region. That's also how I build my opinions. But I'm very critical of the US foreign policy approach. So call me biased. I don't care. Many people think I'm biased against the United States. My approach is that American foreign policy approach is it's mostly based on hard power. They don't activate diplomacy in very few exceptions, and their economy is based on war. So as long as there is ongoing war, or they create mayhem in certain parts of the world, then their economy is functioning, and they're filling the pockets of the military-industrial complex and the bankers in the United States. So the approach of the United States, to begin with, is very destructive for the rest of the world, including their allies in Europe or in Asia or in anywhere around the world. And the alternative powers, the rising powers, are showing that there is a way and this way is different from the approach of the United States. Like, instead of destroying the infrastructure of our countries and then present yourself as our savior, you can build or reconstruct our countries like the Chinese are doing in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle Eastern countries. And that's how you can gain the hearts and the minds of the people. You don't have to agree with the Communist Party in China to at least acknowledge the fact that the Chinese approach is different, and it's not based on destroying the countries, but rather on building the infrastructure of these countries and gaining leverage and influence over these countries through soft power instead of relying on hard power. And that is the approach of the United States. And I would like that to come to an end.
So, Kevork, when you look at, sorry to go off topic here, but when you look at Syria, what would you say like is your favorite, like when you look at Syria to the world, what would you say is like your favorite piece of like quote from any Syrian leader, and what would you say is your favorite holiday destination to go to in Syria that you would really recommend for people to go see historically? And also I wanted to ask, what do the two stars mean in the Syrian flag? What does that represent?
Actually, those are very interesting questions. Actually, if I'm going to Syria for a visit, I would definitely, because that's the only practical way of going to Syria now, you have to go to Beirut. And from Beirut, you take a taxi and you go to Damascus. I think Damascus as the capital city and all its old neighborhoods, for example, in Bab Shar'i and the Umayyad Mosque, for example, and the castles. And you have to go, of course, to Qasiyun Mount and just visit the, let's say, the historical neighborhoods and the old city inside of Damascus. That would be amazing. And you can also experience the nightlife in Damascus, which is great. And later you can go to Homs, which is again safe. You can go to Crac de Chevalier, the castle in Homs. And from Homs, you can also go to the coastal side of Syria, which is many people, when they think of the Middle East, they think it's just a desert. It's far from the reality. It's very far from the reality. If you go to Western Syria, for example, you have the Armenian town of Kesab, you have Latakia, you have Tartus, you have Jable, and near the coastal line, you can experience the touristic sites there. And mostly people are swimming in the Mediterranean, and the weather is really nice, and it's very multicultural. Like you can be wearing whatever you want, like you can be wearing let's say what swimming suit for women, for example, uncovered, or you can cover yourself and go to waters. It's nobody says anything to you. It's your freedom of choice. And after the coastal line, you can go to the mountains, for example, and the lakes and the rivers there. It's so beautiful. Sometimes I show photos to people, they're like mind blown. Is this like in Syria, or is it in somewhere in Malaysia or in some of the islands? Yeah, it's very beautiful. And you can finish your trip in Aleppo. Aleppo, of course, you will see destruction in the city, unfortunately. However, there are still main destinations like the Castle of Aleppo and the old souks, these very old ancient souks that were partly destroyed, but they're being renovated right now. So Syria is definitely a very beautiful destination, and it's very sad that they tried to destroy the country with complete disregard to its civilizational value and its historical place in the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why they wanted to destroy Syria, because they want to erase the history and the value of the country as a cradle of civilization in the Middle East. And that's how they also, for example, if you see these so-called neoliberals who are destroying their own identities, they destroy their own histories, and they don't want for history to play an instrumental role in the present times. So they also try to deprive us from our histories, to destroy our histories, to destroy our cultures. And when you create such mayhem in the country, and you weaken the centralized government and the army to the extent that other non-state actors start spawning, such as ISIS, al-Nusra, Jaish al-Islam, and all these groups that increasingly spawned in the country in the past years, and now mostly are destroyed. But it was a direct result of the power vacuum that occurred in the country, and dumping weapons in the country in the hands of these groups, claiming that there is a democratic revolution in the country and the United States is here to help the Syrian people.
Mm-hmm. I was also just going to mention, so tell me how, what caused the Syrian, so tell me, what caused the Syrian civil war to happen? And what would you say are the greatest lies of Assad? Because there are many lies that say Syrians hate Assad. Assad oppresses minorities, Syria would be peaceful without him. But yet at the same time, a lot of independent media fact checkers like to point out that Syria has its own central bank. It's free, it frees its citizens of debt. It's got a lot of oil reserves going back to the Goldman Heights, which is Syria, and all that, which belongs to Syria, which it really should be. What actually caused the Syrian? So, like I was saying, what caused the Syrian civil war? What would you say are the greatest lies of Assad, and what would you say is Assad's greatest achievement as president?
When the President Bashar came to power in 2000, all the Western leaders from the United States, from Britain, from France, they all, even Hillary Clinton, she called Assad a reformer, she called him a Democrat. And they had high hopes that after Hafez al-Assad, his son, will be more open to engaging with the West in a quote-unquote positive way, and that is to accept a peace treaty with Israel with complete disregard of the rights of the Palestinians, for example. This is what they call separate peace deals. The approach of Syria was clear from the 70s that the Arab-Israeli conflict should be resolved in a collective manner and not an individual manner, which means all the Arabic countries come together, especially the neighboring countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and they negotiate together with Israel for a just peace that can also be in favor of the Palestinians, so that Palestinians could have a state with clear borders, the Palestinian refugees could come back to their countries. There are millions of them, right? So this was the Syrian approach. The Americans tried to persuade the Syrians. Syria refused it, rejected, etc. So when Assad came, the son came to power, they thought they can, with presenting him as a reformer, as a Democrat, accepting him in the quote-unquote international community, inviting him to Paris, inviting him to London, rolling him a red carpet, etc. John Kerry visiting him in Damascus, they thought that this will lead to Assad accepting the terms of the Americans, but they were surprised with the 2003 war, for example, with the invasion of Iraq. The position of Syria was very clear against the invasion, and also Syria supported the resistance against the American occupation forces in Iraq. Syria supported the Lebanese resistance against the occupation of Lebanon in 2006. Syria supported the resistance in Gaza against the occupation and the incursion in 2007 and 2008. So there were multiple experiences with Assad, the son, that the Americans were realized that he is more in support of the groups in the region who say they are resisting against the occupation forces of whether it's the Americans or against the Israelis, even by giving them weapons. So the Syrian side opened its military warehouses to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah later delivered many of these weapons to Gaza. And the Cornet rockets, for example, that Hamas and Jihad use, it's from Syria. The one of the rockets and the long-range missiles that Hamas and Jihad has, the technological knowledge of it, it's from a Chinese missile that the Syrians bought from China and then delivered the knowledge to the Palestinians so that they can produce their own in the Gaza Strip. So I think those are the combination of the reasons why the Americans hated Assad, for giving tangible support to the groups, the anti-American and anti-Israeli groups in the region, in addition to an offer by Qatar. Qatar came to Syria 2007, 2008, and they told Assad that they want to extend a pipeline, a gas pipeline from Qatar to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, Syria, Turkey, and Turkey will distribute them to European market. And Syrians are strategic partners with Russia. So despite the big financial and economic opportunity for Syria, they didn't stab the Russians in the back. And they said, no, we have our strategic partner and ally, Russia, when we're not going to stab them in the back. And if we do so, then Russia will lose the European market completely. Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 will be worthless for Russia. So they rejected. So this was a second factor, in my opinion, why the Americans hated Assad, because they wanted to kill the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 projects between Russia and Europe by giving Qatar this opportunity to bring gas to Europe. So those were the factors, in my opinion, for Assad being an anti-imperialist and anti-American hegemony in the region. Those are the reasons why the American successive administrations wanted to remove him from power. So I argue that they wanted to remove him from power for the sins that he didn't commit, not for the sins that he committed, because Assad, just like any politician, in my opinion, committed mistakes during his presidency, especially on the domestic level. The fast liberalization of the economy, for example, led into big disparities between the middle class and the higher middle class, and many people dropped to the lower middle class because of the free market system. I'm not saying that I'm against it. I'm just saying that the rapid and fast liberalization of the economy led to many people who couldn't catch with the changes that happened in the country. And those were the people later who rose against him when 2011 protests started and the Americans fueled the fires and they started sending weapons. They used these sentiments against Assad to fuel the fire, right? So Americans didn't want Assad to be gone because he was a brutal dictator, killing his own people, blah, 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 all these cliches that they repeat. No, because they wanted to remove him from power because he was not helping the Americans in the region to have an absolute hegemony over the region. And Syria is a very, very important player in the region. And unfortunately, due to the American destructive policy, you can see that Syria is nowadays paralyzed. They cannot really function in the geopolitical hemisphere in the region, and they cannot take their role again because part of their country is still occupied by the Americans. Part of it is occupied by Turkey, and you still have Idlib, which is occupied by Al-Qaeda forces. So I think Assad's decision to fight back against this regime change war, some people argue it is a big mistake. He should have just left power and allow for what is called democratic elections. And others say that he did the right thing for fighting back. I'm one of the people who believe that this was his duty as the president of the country and the head of the armed forces in Syria to fight back, especially after what happened to Libya. In my opinion, if he left the country like Zain al-Abidin did in Tunisia and left his country and escaped, I would have called him a traitor. And I believe that despite the heavy, heavy price that the Syrians paid, there is still a chance for them to regain their sovereignty, their independence, just like 2011 and the era that preceded it, previous of 2011. So, in my opinion, Assad had no choice but to fight. Otherwise, the country would have been in the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood now. And the Muslim Brotherhood are an MI6 agents creation since the 20s of the 19th century. And the Muslim Brotherhood are also a proxy for Qatar and Turkey. So Syria would have been completely under the dominance of the US, the UK, Turkey, and Qatar, were it not for the fight back of or the counter punch of Assad against this regime change war, and with the help of the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, and other allies, Syria managed to foil the regime change war in Syria. They didn't succeed to completely defeat the Americans, but this is a long process. People think that Syria can just kick out the American occupation forces now very quickly. No, this is not how things work. Unfortunately, this is a long process, and the Americans will increasingly find themselves in a situation that their troops are in a volatile situation and they're coming under constant attacks, and they will leave Syria. They don't have a choice. They will leave Syria, but it will take some time. And now we have new reports from the US claim that the Americans are planning on leaving Syria and Iraq in the next few months before the elections. I doubt it. But if they do, that would be a great decision for the Americans and for the Syrians, because what are they doing in Syria is just sadism. They're just occupying the oil fields of Syria. They disallow us from using our oil for heating, for food, for reconstruction, and they also occupy our food basket on the eastern shore of the Euphrates. So, I mean, if Americans leave, I think 50% of the problems in Syria, in my subjective opinion, will be resolved by reactivating and restarting the reconstruction process. Because when you have fuel, you have electricity. When you have electricity, you have manufacturing and factories are working. When you have factories and manufacturing, you have reconstruction. When you have reconstruction, you have jobs and business opportunities. When you have jobs and business opportunities, people will gain money. And when you gain money, the inflation will decrease and the Syrian lira will gain some of its strength back. So this is all in the interest of the ordinary people in Syria, in the country. But if you listen to some of these, they are nothing but agents for the CIA, those who call themselves Syrian opposition figures in Washington, D.C., in Turkey, in Qatar. They're not opposition figures. They're on the payroll of Qatar. They're on payroll of Turkey. They're payroll of the United States, and they're pushing more for more severe sanctions against the Syrian people, while they sit in comfortable offices and enjoying their six-figure salaries every year, right? So they don't care about the Syrian people.
One thing that Kevork I also want to talk about is the whole story with what's called Kurdistan. Kurdistan, is that how you pronounce it? Kurdistan?
Yeah.
There was a reform that happened where I'm not too sure about that, but there was a plan. There was a plan that's been active since 1982, and it was the first plan in 2006. It talked about plans, about breaking Syria and breaking Lebanon and Iraq into different countries, like you have free Kurdistan, this and all that. When you look at that, like, what is the history, especially, how like Turkey invaded Syria? That's correct, right? They did. That's correct. When Turkey invaded Syria, like, what is the history of Turkey and Kurdistan, and like, what role does that play in the greater Israel project? Like, what role does that play? What is the history between Syria and the Kurds and Kurdistan? And what do you think people should know about that?
Yeah, I mean, the Kurdish people are an integral part of the Syrian society. The Kurds, in my opinion, are a very important component of the Syrian society. They are rich in culture, in civilization, in language, in music. I mean, the Kurdish people, I'm an ethnic Armenian, and with the Kurds, we have a very good relationship, and we get along in music, in alcohol, let's say, arak and everything. It's like we don't see much of a difference, we have shared history and everything. However, Kurds, just like the over 20 different ethnicities, religions, sects, races in Syria, they're just part of the Syrian society. And the attempt to weaponize the Kurds against the rest of the Syrian people by saying that the Kurds deserve the part of Syria, and this part is coincidentally is the richest area in oil and wheat. So the Kurds on the eastern shore of the Euphrates, they are 30% of the population, not even the majority. So the Americans are encouraging them to call for separation, right, from Syria. Imagine a 30% of people in an area that is 1/3 of Syria and has over 50% of the Syrian oil and most of the wheat. They're going to take this piece of cake and go. This is not going to happen. I mean, all Syrians are eligible of benefiting from the Syrian oil, not only the Kurds. So Unfortunately, the other day when the Syrian and Iraqi resistance they sent kamikaze drones against U.S. troops in this near the oil fields, unfortunately 5 to 6 Kurdish militants died because they are embedded with the American forces, and the Americans are encouraging them to separate from Syria. And this is not going to happen. And look, I'm someone who is Armenian, and we have close ties with the Kurds, and I would never accept the Kurds to be separated from Syria, because it's very simple. Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, all these regions called Levant. And when the First World War was over, and the French and the Brits, who were the hegemons back then, they divided the area in different sphere of influences. It was it was a strategy of divide and conquer. The French took Lebanon, Syria, the Brits took Palestine, Iraq, for example, and parts of Jordan. So they divided the area already 115 years ago or so. Now that they're trying to divide it again on ethnic and religious lines, this is a second attempt of dividing the region. I think the reason for that is, one, is divide and conquer over the region. Two, to weaken Syria, because Syria, without its oil and without its food basket, then it will be a poor country, and the country cannot feed its people and cannot become an economic powerhouse, because Aleppo, northern city of Aleppo, where I come from, was an economic powerhouse before the war, right? Syria cannot, let's say, reconstruct itself without this. So this is one reason. The second reason is the Balkanization of the region is, as you mentioned, it's an American, it's a Zionist plan in the region, and they don't hide it because, for example, Israeli theorists say that they want to create what is called Greater Israel. And Greater Israel's borders are extended between the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Syria. So if you see now what's happening in Syria, and you put the map in front of you and see the map of control over Syria, you will see that the Israeli theorists say that their borders will end in the Euphrates River, but on the western shore of the Euphrates. And who will control the eastern shore of the Euphrates, according to the Israeli Zionist theorists, they say it's the Kurdistan of Iraq and Syria. So they want for the Kurds to occupy that area, to separate from Syria, to create their own country there. And then when Israel expands, according to them, they would have a border with Kurdistan, with the Kurds. So this is what the theorists say, and they say we have to purify the region. So purify from who, right? Who are the people that has to be killed or expelled so that it would be purified according to them? I think with the current situation, for example, in Palestine, that they want for the 2 million Palestinians from Gaza to be expelled to the Sinai. Yeah. And if they go to the Sinai, they will try to come back. They will try to form a resistance to come back, or peacefully or with arms. And then Israel will say, there is a security threat coming from the Sinai, and now I have to create a buffer zone in the Sinai. And where does the Sinai border end? With the Nile, right? The Nile River. So if they kick the Palestinians out there, and then they claim that there's a threat coming from the Sinai and occupy it, then their border will be near the Nile that the Zionist theorists are preaching nowadays. So I think this is just an illusion to think that they can achieve this goal. I think Israeli reputation is now destroyed beyond repair. And I think if they were serious about creating what is called Greater Israel, I think after what happened in the Gaza Strip, it has become a mission impossible for them. And the only powers who stand behind Israel nowadays are only the governments in the United States and some of the governments in the European continent. The rest of the world is disgusted of Israel and what they're doing. Nobody supports Israel except them.
Especially, I was just going to say, sorry for interrupting, but that photo of what happened this morning with, what was it? What city which got genocide again this morning?
Rafah.
Rafah. That photo, there was a photo where Mossad, I remember a month ago, posted a photo where they were saying, "Oh, go get Gaza," and it was a photo of a little child's arm that had come off. And they actually deleted that Twitter post, if you remember. And now there's a Twitter post going around which, like, is a post of a young girl with her legs cut off and her being hanged. And when I see that photo, Kevork, it really reminds me of the photo of some of the photos you see in the Armenian genocide, how there were some people hanged. And when you see these photos, people are going to see this and think that Israel's not on the right side of history. They are a proxy state of the Zionists. They are trying to push the sixth Zionist agenda. And, if you think about it, Palestine is a warning to the rest of the world. It's the first 15-minute city. It's what the global Zionists want to turn the world in, especially what they're trying to do with lockdowns and COVID and all that stuff. It's absolutely insane, and it's heartbreaking, Kevork. It's absolutely heartbreaking, man. It's just, it's unbelievable.
I don't know if anyone who has a child and can see these photos, how can they live with this situation? And this is one of the reasons why I keep reposting these photos, whether on X or on my Instagram account, because I know there are many people in my feed and my followers, they're fathers and mothers, and they have children. And when you see these photos, how do you feel about it? How can you stay passive? I don't have a child yet, but I will never ever see my future child the same way after what I saw in the Gaza Strip. It is. Their numbers are very very high. Like we're speaking about 50% of the casualties are women and children. And this is this.
It's actually 70%. I read somewhere it's actually 70%.
Actually, the thing is, there are many Palestinians lost. We don't know where are they. There are people under the rubble. We don't know if they're alive or dead. So the numbers can increase exponentially in the next days, because every time Israeli forces leave an area or redeploy to a different area, they find the Palestinians dig in and they find bodies of many murdered people. So this rate, I'm saying, like minimum 50% of the people who died and murdered in the Gaza Strip are women and children. And I will never be able to live with myself again if I don't oppose this. And regardless of the consequences, I don't care what is going to happen. What are they going to call me? What are they going to smear me about? I don't care. I truly think that I'm on the right side of history, and I think that what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip is completely inhumane. It's very barbaric, and what happened in the ICJ, even all the judges except for the Kenyan, I think, and the Israeli, they all said that there is a plausible ground for a genocide in the Gaza Strip. So the politicians in the West who still support Israel, they're complicit. And if the ICJ rules that the Israel violated the Genocide Convention, all these politicians, whether they are foreign ministers, whether they are prime ministers, whether they are presidents, whether they are defense ministers, whether they are members of parliament who supported Israel, must be also considered complicit. They must also stand trial. It's not okay in the 21st century, in 2024, that these politicians who preach about human rights and democracy, blah blah blah, then they support what's happening in the Gaza Strip. Israel told the Palestinians to go to Rafah, said this is a safe zone.
Yeah.
Go to the Rafah, we're not going to bomb Rafah. And 1.4 million people are gathered in Rafah city. And now the Netanyahu government cowardly bombing an highly populated area, complete disregard to the civilian casualties. What kind of message does this send after the ICJ ruling, the initial ruling? It sends the message that Israel is determined in continuing its barbaric military campaign against the Palestinians. That means that Israel doesn't give two Fs about the ruling of the ICJ, means that Israel sees itself above international law. This is the only thing this is the only message that I get from this, because every human rights campaigner, every human rights organization, every UN human rights special rapporteurs, etc. So they're all speaking about this case. It's not like something controversial, It's not like there is a consensus about it. Let's say. So I think nobody can stop Israel from committing these barbaric acts in the Gaza Strip until the Arabic countries come together and Egypt intervenes. It's time for Egypt to intervene to protect the Palestinians. And Rafah is the border between Egypt and Palestine. So they have to intervene in this. Otherwise, the consequence of it is going to be 2 million Palestinians expelled from Gaza to the Sinai, and it will cause an enormous economic pressure for Egypt, and also security issues for Israel, because later the Palestinians, if you are a Palestinian from the Gaza Strip and you were expelled now with such a barbaric manner from your homes and from your farms, you want to go back, right? If I'm a Palestinian living in the Gaza Strip right now and I'm on Rafah border crossing and I was kicked out and my father and mother and brother were killed, I would like to go back. I would like to go back and take revenge. This is how human nature works. So when that happens, the Egyptians will face an enormous security problems there. And then the Israelis will try to eliminate what they call a security threat against them from Sinai. So it's a really hard decision to make. I understand that, but I think because Saudi Arabia is backing Egypt in this, they have to act in a more physical manner, not only talk, not only diplomatic statements. It's not enough to condemn Israel. It's not enough to warn Israel. Israel will not listen. They're not listening to their allies in Washington. They listen to Saudis or to the Egyptians. Egypt has the strongest army in the region. They have to intervene now, and not saying to fight against Israel, but to claim that they are the protector and of the Palestinians there inside Gaza, not in Sinai, but they have to go and cross the border and protect once the Egyptians are inside of Gaza, the Israelis cannot bomb them. And this has to be an Arabic decision. Saudis, Syrians, Egyptians, Qataris, everyone must unite now. This is a moment for unity, and they have to put all their differences aside for the sake of the Palestinians.
Kevork, one thing I noticed is, one thing I saw, I was reading about some people, for example, Henry Kissinger, who passed away, which not really a good human being, was a terrible person. Henry Kissinger said here that Syria has, so propagandists will say, Syria has never been an historic state, and ISIS, the United States Israeli created ISIS, will say that it was made up by the French and the English. When you hear people say that, like, Syria is a fake state, it was never made, and all that, like, how would you say, like, what facts would you bring to, like, debunk them? And what would you say historically, like, what would you say historically is the greatest thing that Syria has done to lead the world forward, like, in invention-wise or poetry or any otherwise?
Actually, I don't really give so much attention to what they say about Syria, because the reason for such, let's say, statements, and the reason, if you combine it with what they did in Syria, you understand that first you play down the importance of Syria, its civilization, which started 6,000 to 7,000 BC. Before Christianity. They were the Assyrians, they were the Akkadians, they were the Ashuris, they were the Romans, they were the Greeks, they were the Muslims. Syria has lived, the Mongols, the Fatimids, every civilization that was created in the region, even abroad, they passed through Syria. If they didn't stay in Syria, they passed through Syria, The first, for example, diplomatic agreement in the world was struck in Syria, in the city of Idlib, and a copy of it was given to the former UN Special Envoy to Syria. I think his name was de Mistura. And Syria is a cradle, like it combined all this. It's a bot for all these civilizations and cultures and languages in the country. For example, if you go to Syria, to a town called Ma'lula on the suburbs of Damascus, the people still speak the language of Jesus Christ, Aramaic, and they pray in Aramaic, they speak in Aramaic. And I was there. It is fascinating, like see that in Syria, people speak Armenian, speak Kurdish, speak Arabic, speak Yazidi, speak Urdu, speak different languages, like every community has its special character. And despite that, they all live together and coexist without problems. This is what I call multiculturalism, right? This is what the Western so-called neoliberals want for their countries, like to be multicultural. But our multiculturalism is not engineered. It's not enforced. There is no tyrannical force enforcing this multiculturalism on the country. It was naturally developed after centuries and centuries of interaction between these components of the Syrian society. For example, Armenians were present in Syria even before the Armenian genocide. I believe it goes back to the 14th century. However, after the Armenian genocide, most of the Armenians who are present nowadays in Syria, they came after the genocide. But when we came to Syria, we were not targeted to persecution, we were not targeted to discrimination, we were not targeted to racism. In the contrary, the Arabs, the Kurds, the Sunnis, the Shias, the Alevis, everyone, they embraced us and they considered us part of the society, and they protected us against the Ottoman Empire, who wanted to exterminate us, right? So Syrians are historically tolerant people and very protective people, I would say. So this is one of the reasons, like, I think that I have a debt on my neck that the Syrians protected my grandparents, and I was born in Syria thanks to this protection, right? So I do defend Syria also partly because I feel like Syrians protected me, and now I have to be a good citizen and defend this country, right? So in my opinion, Syrians and the Iraqis in the region, they presented then the perfect example in the past centuries of how you first present a civilization and how you preserve a civilization. However, it's truly people need to understand that it was an outside intervention that destroyed this harmony in these countries. It was an outside force which, with their so-called democracies that they came on the back of the tanks, which destroyed this beautiful mosaic in the society. I mean, the extermination that happened against the Yazidis in Syria and in Iraq, right, by ISIS. So it always goes back to the question, who created ISIS and why ISIS was employed in Syria? The question is not really difficult, by the way, to answer. And it's not like two people in the CIA who were sitting after a long night of shift, they thought of creating ISIS. No, you create the conditions for ISIS to grow or spawn. You create a power vacuum. You create a situation in the country where non-state actors can be activated, and then you inject some religious radicalism through your mouthpieces in the region. All of a sudden, you see that all these big TV channels are speaking about the importance of fighting against the infidel Assad on Al Jazeera and the Qatari Jazeera and Saudi Arabia and other TV channels that are allied with the United States. And then you start funding the radical imams in the country, tell them that this is a holy war. And after that, you dump weapons worth billions and billions of dollars in the country, free for anyone to use. So who do you think is going to carry the weapons? Are they the secularists are going to carry the weapons and fight against Assad, or they are the radical Islamists who really decapitate people and burn them alive and act like ISIS did? Like, we've seen all these things in Syria, and now they compare Hamas to ISIS, whereas they themselves helped in the creation of ISIS in Syria, right? Who it was John Kerry in 2017. I think this was in December or November 2017. He met with Syrian opposition figures in Washington, D.C. Of course, put brackets in Syrian opposition figures. And someone was recording the conversation and he leaked it to the media, and the WikiLeaks published it, that John Kerry was very honest about it, that we were watching ISIS grow, and we thought it's a good idea that if ISIS grows and they invade Damascus, then they would ISIS would force Assad to compromise with the Americans. But instead of Assad compromising, Putin came in support of Assad, he says. So, like, how can it be more clear that the Americans were using ISIS as a leverage over Assad? They were threatening him with ISIS, with the occupation of Damascus with ISIS coming from Palmyra. And when Assad realized that ISIS is expanded, they were occupying around half the country, right? So they asked through legal channels the support of Russia, and the Russians came in support. So Syrians are grateful for the Russians, for the Iranians, for the Lebanese, for the Iraqis who came in support of Syria, because this is one, let's say, camp. If Syria fell in the hands of these people, you know what's going to happen next, right? The Qataris are going to extend their gas pipeline to Europe, and then Russia will lose its leverage over Europe through the gas pipelines. And the Israelis will encourage for the Balkanization of Syria. The Kurds will have their piece of cake, and then other groups will feel threatened. They will also create their sub-states. Syria will be divided into probably 10 parts. So I think it is it was an important decision and a brave decision by all these powers to come in support of Syria, because Iran would also have lost its access to the Mediterranean if Syria is lost. Also its access to Hezbollah, because they send weapons to Hezbollah. The Chinese would have lost their access to the Mediterranean because they want to have access through the Silk and Road Initiative, and the Russians would have lost as well. So everybody except the Americans and the Israelis, in my opinion, and the Europeans would have lost if Assad was gone and the puppet government was installed instead of him.
So, Kevork, I just wanted to ask you, before we finish up, we've got 8 more minutes left. So as we all know, Tucker interviewed Vladimir Putin, which that interview was very fascinating, very interesting to hear a different point of view. What was your biggest, what would you say is the moments that you really enjoyed in that interview? In what way was that interview related to Syria in a way? And if Tucker did an interview with Assad, what would you want Tucker Carlson to talk with Assad about? And like, what would be the most fascinating thing, about Syrian history that Assad should bring up to Tucker?
Actually, I think it would be an amazing idea if Tucker interviews President of Syria, because his country is directly involved in the dynamics in Syria, let's say pre-2017, through a regime change war called Timber Sycamore, the CIA's covert operation, and after 2017, by sending forces to Syria, occupying the oil fields and pretending that they're fighting terrorism there, and also occupying the border crossings of Syria between Iraq and Jordan. Also, why the American forces? What's the purpose? What's the goal of the American forces? I think that's an important question that Syrians have to tell to Tucker Carlson, so that Tucker Carlson can deliver it to the American audience. Why the American forces are stationed in Syria? They are uninvited. They are considered occupation forces, and they're coming under attack, and they're losing soldiers. Why? Why are the Syrians attacking them? Why are the Iraqis attacking them? Do we consider the Americans enemies? Or do we consider their soldiers occupying us occupation forces? That's why we're fighting them. Because it's important to differentiate between, does Syria consider the United States an enemy country? And does Syria consider the American people as enemies, right? All these questions are important to answer, because nobody in Syria, in my opinion, consider the United States an enemy. or Americans' enemy, we consider the American forces inside Syria illegal occupation, and they're choking our people. So we want to drive them out of the country. That's the reason why there is a resistance against the American forces. So people need to understand the context, the background, and the root cause of the problem. Regarding the interview of Tucker with Putin, I think it's fascinating to break through the walls that the American government and the Europeans tried to build in order to block any voices coming from Russia. They banned the Russian outlets. And now, thanks to this interview, hundreds of millions of people watched and listened to the Russian point of view, something they didn't want to, right? I think the other importance is that the independent journalism will replace legacy media sooner or later. I mean, no mainstream media outlet is capable of attracting hundreds of millions of views, regardless of who they are interviewing. I think also they are really bothered by the fact that Americans and Europeans watched that Putin is not some nut job, some crazy person who woke up in the morning and decided to invade Ukraine. There is a historical context for it, and there are steps and counter steps were taken in the past decades till NATO was going to expand in Ukraine, which is historically, it's very, very important for Russia to at least stay neutral and not to be pro-Russian or anti-Russian. So there are many factors to it, right? But Tucker, in my opinion, was not in charge of the conversation. And this was something I was covering the other day with two experts. And it's so obvious that Putin was in charge of the conversation, and Tucker lost his, let's say, duty of becoming the person asking the questions. Regardless of what he's asking, it's Putin who is guiding the conversation to where he wants, because he knows this is an important opportunity for him to speak to the Western audiences. And if he didn't care about the Western audiences and he didn't care about them listening to his point of view for the sake of restoring peace between the Russians and the Western world, he wouldn't have bothered to speak to Tucker, right? If he doesn't care about the Western world and he doesn't care about peace with the Western world, why would he give this interview to Tucker? He would just ignore him and he would just continue his alleged goal of occupying entire Europe, right? Because this is what they say that Putin is intending on doing. So I think he wanted to deliver his message. I'm not saying that he's a saint. I'm not saying that he's someone who wouldn't lie. This is what politicians do. But the European and the American politicians aren't also saints. So I think it's better for them to joe together and talk than just war and continue fighting. It will have a spillover over other countries, and I don't think that's a good idea. We saw what happened last time in World War II, right?
Yeah. So, Kevork, before we finish up, where can people find you?
People can find me on my YouTube channel called Syriana Analysis, and they can see my name now on the screen, Kevork Almassian. They can find me on X, or formerly known on Twitter.
Well, thank you, Kevork. It was a pleasure having you. You know, we should definitely do this again sometime in the future. How does that sound to you? It would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And I just want to say to everybody, well, thank you for coming off. With a pleasure having you. But I just want to say to everybody, please go and support Kevork's channel, Syriana Analysis. It's an absolutely fantastic channel. It's very knowledgeable on geopolitics, Syrian politics, Middle Eastern. Fantastic channel, very great. You'll have an absolutely fantastic time watching it. Please go and give him a like and subscribe. Go follow him on Twitter and give him all the support he deserves by following this channel. Give him a sub. And please, everybody, to remember to share the Welsh Product Podcast episode 145 around. Please remember to like and subscribe to this video. Have a nice day, everybody. God bless you, and please, and also free Palestine and also free Syria too. You know, God bless you guys. Take care. Have a nice day. Bye.